Welcome to another episode of Twice Told Tales podcast. Today we're going to talk about Chris's recent interview with Press TV on Midstream, which is hosted by our previous guest, Marwa Osman, based in Beirut. So, Chris, what was the interview about and why were you invited to talk about it?
Well, that's a very good question because I'm absolutely not an expert on any of this topic. But I think my expertise lies in just being very skeptical and asking questions where other people aren't interested in asking questions. And so when I first heard about that horrible explosion and I heard the explanations that they had proposed, I immediately knew there was something fishy going on because what they said happened doesn't make any sense. And so I talked to Marwa about that after we interviewed her. I was texting her about something, and that came up because ever since then I've always been trying to see if other people also find it a very fishy story. And she apparently had never considered my questions, and she thought that was. I think it really impacted her that I asked those questions, and so she wanted to get me on the air so I could say that, which I thought was great. And so basically, for me, the question is, it's just basic chemistry. Like they say that there was ammonium nitrate that just exploded, and officially it was just exploded. That was it. Then after a week or something, they started talking about like fireworks nearby because I think maybe they were getting a little pushback. Like, well, how does ammonium nitrate just explode? And someone said, "Oh, you need a firework to set it off." But like, because there's some rudimentary understanding of how an ammonium nitrate fuel oil detonation works, because you need a primary charge to set off the secondary larger explosion. So maybe a firework would do that, but nobody ever has explained how you would have a homogenized mixture of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. Like you would need, it's not just ammonium nitrate you need for an explosion. It's like saying, I'm going to make a sandwich. I have this bag of flour, and so I'm going to cut it up and make a sandwich out of it. Well, it's not bread, it's just flour. Like you have to do other things to the flour to have bread. And so if you just say I have ammonium nitrate, so therefore I have a bomb, doesn't make any sense. The mechanism that makes ammonium nitrate work in a bomb as a component is that it is it can create rapid oxidation. So it's a very stable molecule, but if it's exposed to a high explosive around it, it can shed the oxygen molecules really quickly. And so that doesn't mean it's not flammable. You can't light fertilizer on fire. There's nothing in it that actually burns. It just provides an oxygen molecule, which then will burn something else. And so you need to add that something else, and that's the fuel oil, which you like coat all of the ammonium nitrate with, like evenly, and then that provides the fuel so that the oxygen atom, when it leaves the ammonium nitrate quickly, because that's the only thing ammonium nitrate does, is it can quickly provide you with an oxygen atom. So you then put a primary charge in there, which then releases quickly that oxygen atom from the ammonium nitrate, which then creates this chain reaction of a larger, very rapid explosion, and like amplifies the small stick of dynamite or something, or even maybe a powerful firework that kicked off the whole explosion. But none of those components really exist in this story. And the other thing is, ammonium nitrate as a chemical is hydrophilic, so it means that it attracts water molecules. So in this case, the story is that this ammonium nitrate was stored for years as an abandoned product at a port. And so if you do that, ports are generally humid. And if you stored in a area of high humidity, you were going to attract water molecules to the ammonium nitrate, and so eventually, after some years, it's just going to be like a brick. If you had powder before, or granules, it's just going to solidify because there's so much water, and it's just become big hard, not bags of granules, but like big bricks, which I don't think you could sell it for anything. And my suspicion is that's why the company abandoned it there, is because it was stored there long enough that it became unsellable and also unexplodable, because then how would you mix it with fuel oil? You'd have to grind it up again and dry it out and then mix it with fuel oil and then package it in a way that you could then, use it as a secondary charge in an explosion. So I don't I don't really understand any of it. To me, and the reason I understand it's not because I'm like some kind of detonations expert or like have any experience with that. I mean, as a kid, I definitely enjoyed blowing things up, but like I just for fun. But like, I mean, in fireworks, and I got, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
lucky
you
to
have
have
to clarify that.
I'm lucky to have all my
What you
fingers, but
meant.
that was just, experimentation as a kid with what you can do. And I hope every kid around the world does some level of that, because it's a way of engaging with the physical reality and its general curiosity. But other than that, I mean, the reason I know this specific reaction isn't because I've ever produced an ammonium nitrate fuel oil explosion. I haven't. But when I was growing up, there were 3 very traumatic experiences for me, kind of waking up to the world and the evils in it, and the stories that go around those evils that are often untrue. There was the Oklahoma City federal building that was exploded supposedly by this white supremacist guy, and that story is very iffy. Timothy McVeigh, I mean, I don't have any sympathy for his politics, but also the story is very fishy. The World Trade Center bombing attempt, which is also extremely fishy, and I think those guys, the people who were fingered in that, are definitely imprisoned without enough evidence. So, and then the bombings of the embassies in Nairobi, which was really the only thing that the FBI ever held. The only thing that took Osama bin Laden to the top of the terrorist list. If anyone remembers, after 9/11, he was not on that list for 9/11 forever. The only thing he was ever on that list for officially was those bombings, and it's still not really clear and how that story worked out. But that was really the only thing that Osama bin Laden had done against America officially. That's one of the curious things about the 9/11 story, is that Osama bin Laden was just sort of tied to that by the media, but never officially by the government, at least on the terrorist list. So those were the 3 things. There was Nairobi and the East African embassy bombings. There was the federal building, and there was the World Trade Center building. And the thing that tied all those together was this story of fertilizer becoming a bomb. So obviously, as a kid who's watching his father use fertilizer around the house and who is familiar with it, you're worried. Is this stuff going to blow up people around me? Like, so if you're a curious, intelligent person, you go explore, like, well, how does this work? What is causing this to be a bomb? What's the actual danger here? And I think part of the narrative that the government was using is they wanted to make this a fearful thing where anyone in their backyard could create a bomb that could like take out a giant building. Oh my God, we're all going to die. So like that narrative of fear is much more powerful when it could be like, anyone around me could be a bomber, because all you need is like a Home Depot, some fertilizer, and a gas station. But it really isn't that simple. It's a more complicated process to build those explosives. But anyway, in the process back then in the 90s, there was this thing on the internet, which I don't know if it exists anymore. It's called the Anarchist Cookbook. So that was like some chemists wrote this guide to all the different explosions, how you make them, how different bombs, how you even showed you how to make C4 and all these other. And so it was a very fascinating read at the time. And the one thing that had a very informative chapter on was this ammonium nitrate fuel oil process. So I read that, and I just remember from it the details of how it worked, because it was very comforting. I was like, okay, well, this is definitely something that I don't think like anyone can make, and it even made me very suspicious of the explosions, because I'm like, maybe these were not really that bomb. Maybe it was like some other bomb, and they just called it that. But at any rate, the actual story of how that chemical process works became embedded in my mind. So when I heard this story where it was just ammonium nitrate, it wasn't, because before, and it's funny, if you look at ANFO on Wikipedia, ammonium nitrate fuel oil, ANFO on Wikipedia, they have scrubbed those 3 events from that site. So the only thing on that site that's of relevance in our conversation is the Beirut Blast. The other 3, the World Trade Center, the African bombings, and the Oklahoma City building, those are all off of the Wikipedia page, it's amazing because those are 3 extremely prominent terrorist events in the narrative. They've been scrubbed from Wikipedia. I'm wondering if that's recent, because if you do read about those, and if media did report on those, they would see all the narrative about how these explosions work and how it requires fuel oil. And this current narrative is completely absent of that. And it's put us all on this road to, well, I think one of the things that this narrative does is it benefits the World Economic Forum's agenda to demonize ammonium nitrate as a dangerous product, because one of the goals is to reduce fertilizer on crops, because they want to make a induce food shortage. I mean, that's obvious. They're trying to induce global food shortages, and they've done that through a lot of limitations on use of fertilizer in Europe so far. And so the goal is to like create this boogeyman of ammonium nitrate in the idiotic masses. And so we're seeing this kind of narrative. Oh, this is ammonium nitrate is going to kill people, and it's totally insane. But that seems to be where a lot of that energy is being put in a narrative structure. And but at the same time, it just doesn't work. So the story that they say, without some other actor who created this fuel oil mixture and then placed a primary detonator somewhere in the explosion so that you could have it work, because you can't just light it on fire, even when you mix it with fuel, or it'll just burn like a fuel fire. It won't have a high explosion. That requires a tiny bomb inside the little bigger bomb in order for that to work. So yeah, I was just exasperated for years because nobody talked about it. I talked to Kevin Barrett a couple weeks ago before we were interviewed on his podcast about it, and he let me know that Veterans Today had some article which had similar. I don't know exactly the details of the article. I've never seen it. Has similar hypothesis as me on this. So I'm glad at least someone else is talking about it. But it's shocking to me that you have entire nations and entire legal teams and entire communities of people, which include a lot of intelligent chemists and physicists in the Middle East, who aren't questioning this ridiculousness. So that's why Marwa asked me. And so I was apparently the only person who's willing to ask that question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you always ask really interesting questions, and I'm glad that Press TV and Marwa wanted to bring that up. Well, the explosion happened in 2020, but it was back on the headlines when one random British company was blamed for the thing that happened, or partly blamed for what happened. Which, as you said, doesn't make much sense. if I mean I don't know I don't know much about chemistry, but also like just what you said,
I don't either.
uh, how it yeah, I mean, how would you store such amount of explosives for so many years if that was the case? And why aren't we hearing fertilizers exploding everywhere in like, different parts of the world? It's interesting, like in 2004, if in February 2004, there was an explosion in a town in Iran where it was, I mean, it's known as the Neishabur train disaster. There was a cargo train that was carrying fertilizer, and it exploded and it killed about 300 people. And the explosion was so strong that some people thought like there was some sort of a minor earthquake. But in that disaster, the train was carrying um, like the fertilizers and petrol and cotton and sulfur. Like it wasn't only fertilizers, and there was some sort of a derailment, and the wagons went off the rail, and like, I mean, there are some other elements that led to the explosion. It's not that the fertilizers just exploded on themselves. Um, so I mean,
That's
yeah, I
interesting.
mean,
Yeah, it would be interesting to read the details of that because I'm sure that's possible, like theoretically possible, if you have a derailment and like the things sort of mix and then there's some charge that sets it off. But
exactly.
if you read the initial stories of this Beirut blast, they reference how dangerous fertilizer is by referencing fertilizer manufacturing plants that have exploded. They don't talk about just like a fertilizer storage facility exploding because that doesn't happen. And that's a different thing when a fertilizer plant explodes because the precursors, the process to make the fertilizer, does include some very unstable and flammable components and explosive components. But once you produce the fertilizer itself, it's very stable. And another thing that people aren't understanding is the difference between a fire and a high explosive. So, like, if this was on fire, that just a localized burning thing, but this had huge pressure waves that came off of it, and that means that you had to get an explosion, not just an out of control fire. Because yeah, so that's another thing where you'll see in the media coverage is they kind of conflate the idea that explosion is just as easy as like creating a high explosion is just as easy as like an accidental fire, like the cow kicked over the lantern and now we have no more Beirut. Like that's not how explosions are very difficult to set up that amount of potential energy. So yeah, and with ammonium nitrate, like you need a fuel. It doesn't have to be fuel oil. It doesn't have to be. There's another way of doing it. The World Trade Center bombing supposedly was like using hydrogen, like a hydrogen-based component there, so that I guess when the oxygen atom is kicked off of the ammonium nitrate, it's supposed to bond rapidly with the hydrogen, creating instant water vapor, which is a very, very powerful uh, potential energy bond with the hydrogen bond there. So like I think that there are other fuel options, but in this case they don't even give any idea of what the fuel is in the high explosion. They just are talking about an oxidizer. So it's like uh you know uh
Like there is a missing part, and what could that missing part of the story be, do you think?
I think it's a missile strike. I think it's obviously a missile strike. If you just review all the I mean, I was at the time I was like eating up every report there because I was like, well, this is baloney. What else could happen? And there was multiple eyewitness accounts of like a fighter jet following another jet, and the Israelis have this really like cowardly tactic of having their fighter jets go in the radar shadow of another aircraft so that they can sneak into radar zones that they're not allowed to, and then they won't be caught on radar because they're like hiding in the shadow of another plane. And that looks like that could have
Right.
been what happened. Also, Israel has definitely the capability to shoot missiles into the port there without being in Lebanese airspace because it's a port, so it's on the coast. So the Israeli plane could be just a mile off the coast, and they could still strike Beirut without any kind of being outside of their whatever zone of. Anyway, they could it could be a missile strike. There's a lot of different ways that could have happened. I think that makes sense. Just a very, very high powered payload there on a missile. I don't know anything about those in detail, so but that seems logical. If you're going to strike something, just strike and have they're not just going to strike willy nilly. They'll have a narrative built up that they can just hand off to their dudes in Lebanon, and the Israelis will just say, well, here's the explanation you can tell people, or you can fight us. And so you basically make Lebanon like publicly subservient to Israel's by providing, if you're Israel, you make them subservient to you by providing them this bogus narrative, which they can then sell to their entire population. And it's so bogus that just the chemists can poke holes in it. So it creates this kind of power over them, just like 9/11 creates this power over America, because the story is so dumb that the fact that American government sold that story to its people means that it destabilizes that relationship between the people and the government, so that it's like Israel put this wedge between the people and the government with this really bogus story. And I think they did the same here with Lebanon. So it's a way of controlling the Lebanese government, because if it came out that this story, if people start questioning this story, the main loser is the Lebanese government, because they look like fools, and looks like not only like fools, they look like they're subservient to Israel, just like the U.S. government would if people actually questioned 9/11. So that's how I view it. I view it as just like a propaganda victory and a military victory by Israel in two points there, but the strike itself, and then the control of the government narrative and control over its people.
So you think there is a chance that Israel was actually targeting the storage? I mean, it wasn't that they were doing it wasn't by mistake or anything. Like, they wanted to explode that place. I think they knew that, and they did.
I mean, yeah, these guys, these military engineers or whatever, are very meticulous. They know how the pressure wave is going to act. They know where it's going to go. So they would have said, they did this because they knew they would have this explanation that they could provide. Because if they struck with no explanation, they just randomly struck the port, randomly with nothing, no explanation or anything, that couldn't get into the media right away, Israel is cowardly. They don't want a war. They're not going to do well in a war, actual war with Lebanon. Has been proved before. But Lebanon also will suffer hugely in that. So you don't want to just strike randomly. You strike with a intention. So you strike this. You already have this story. Oh, there's this ammonium nitrate. Oh, it's such a horrible accident or whatever. And so then Israel immediately nobody talked about Israel at all. There was only a few people saying that they saw planes. Maybe it was an Israeli strike, but it was like hardly anyone talked about that. So
I haven't heard of that anywhere else. I mean, I haven't even heard anyone asking questions, but I would like to hear more chemists coming up and talking about it. Like, how is this really possible? I wanted to read a few lines from the report from the 2004 explosion in Iran that I told you about, and I want you to see, because like I said, I don't know enough to have any comment on that. All I know is, based on what I just searched and read, is that the fertilizers cannot explode on themselves. Like, you definitely need something to ignite a fire and that would lead to an explosion. So the disaster, this one from the Neyshabour train disaster in Iran, which happened on February 18, 2004. The Guardian report says the disaster happened when around 50 carriages carrying petrol, fertilizer, and sulfur products waiting at Abu Muslim station in Neishapur began moving unexpectedly, possibly because of earth tremors. Speeding without an engine or anyone in control, the wagons overturned when they reached the next stop, Khayyam, which is around 20 kilometers outside the city. A blaze began, and as firefighters tackled the flames, a series of explosions devastated the carriages. The Associated Press said that the dead comprised officials, including the local governor, mayor, and fire chief, and 182 fire and rescue workers. At least 400 people were reported to have been injured. And
How many people died?
yeah, it talks around 300, more
How is
than
that
200.
possible? Was it in a big city where this happened? Like, how is
It was near a city, yes, and
Wow.
like the windows broke and small
Wow.
houses
Wow.
collapsed as the force of the explosion. Yeah, it was really
How
terrible.
fast
I
was the
don't
train
actually
going
remember.
when it crashed?
Uh, Reports of the number? No, I don't see anything here. I don't know.
Huh.
Yeah, but it says the ferocity of the blast was such that windows were reported to have been shattered within a radius of more than 10 kilometers, according to the state-run news
I mean, you could
agency.
see in which something would happen where there'd be like a giant, like, car full of like powderized ammonium nitrate or granular ammonium nitrate, and then there'd be a fuel car behind it, and then when it's crashed, that fuel just poured over the fertilizer, and then in somehow along the way there was enough of a physical uh, charge or explosion or something that would have led to that rapid decay.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, I mean, I don't know enough about the chemistry, but I guess it's possible that if it was soaked in fuel and you had a fire, somehow the fire could trigger an explosion, but that's not how any of the like official way of creating that high explosive reaction is. Normally they don't, it's not the fire that makes the explosion, it's the pressure wave of the first explosion that pushes the oxygen molecules off of the ammonium nitrate into the fuel, which then leads to the second wave, the second high explosive, the big explosion, which then kind of emanates out through the ammonium nitrate fuel oil mixture, and then as it moves out very rapidly, it kicks all the oxygen molecules off and creates this huge explosion. So it's actually the physical pressure wave that is creating the oxidation effect. That's how I understand it. I don't know. Maybe that's I haven't read this in like 20 years, so I don't know. But that's how I understood it. It was like it's a physical reaction that creates this explosive effect. It's not just burning. It's not fire that starts it. But maybe that. And I kind of vaguely remember this train thing now that you're talking about it, because I think that was, when was that? That definitely was before
2004.
Oh, okay.
It was actually
Yeah.
2 months, actually less than 2 months after a deadly earthquake we had in the south of Iran, which
Oh,
killed
wow.
more than 40,000 people.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
a
It was like
dramatic
yeah. Yeah, it was really, I mean, the earthquake was terrible, and then this explosion happened, so
Well, that's kind of
yeah.
the reverse of no, that's the reverse of what happened in Lebanon, right? They got this explosion and then they got an earthquake. But
Yeah, and in like 2 years time.
yeah,
But that one was 2 months. Like in 2 months
that's
having
true.
that happen.
Wow.
It's really terrible.
Well, yeah. So basically, I'm not saying I know any of this is expertise. If anyone knows any more information, you could post it in the comments, because I'm just interested in it. And it just seems, from what I understand, it just seems super fishy. And what's even more fishy on top of that is the actual interview Marwa was giving, or was her story was actually about this phony lawsuit that is obviously phony. Even if you just forget everything I just said, it's still a phony lawsuit because the people that they're holding accountable have no direct connection to the company that was storing these goods. They are like, it's like some business secretary, some office that has like business accounts had the company that stored this chemical and these Russian Syrian people's company like in the same filing cabinet. That's all it is. There's no relationship directly in the company. It's like they both had the same registered shipping agent or something. Yeah, totally unrelated. Like it's like, I mean, it's like saying, oh, you're like my mail, or like it's like saying whoever's mail is delivered by the same person who delivers Jeffrey Dahmer's mail is a murderer. Like what? Like this is not related. So, and it's the same logic, but because these guys are sanctioned, they have no voice in the trial, and so they can just make up whatever loose connection they want to these people. They could just say, oh, they look like them. Like there doesn't need to be. It just needs to be vaguely or maybe complicated enough that people kind of glaze over and they don't care. And so nobody's gonna actually do anything to lift a finger to help these guys who are like, I don't know anything about them, but they have enough money that the U.S. wanted to sanction them, and they're I guess because they're Russians. I think they're also Syrian, but I think the Russian part is because they supported Assad is why they initially sanctioned them. But now the fact that they're also Russian nationals helps right now because they can maintain those sanctions. So these guys have a bunch of money frozen in U.S. accounts, and this lawsuit is just concocted as a way of getting that money out by the lawyers who are in the trial. It's not going to go to anyone. I guarantee you the victims of the Beirut Blast are not going to get much money from this. It's not about helping people. It's about some lawyers wanting to make a big cash grab with a trial that they can basically do like without any preparation. They can just walk in there and say, oh, this guy's company is in the same filing cabinet as that other guy's company. Oh, give us your money. And that's it. That's the trial. So it's obviously a show trial. But what makes it even more damaging is it's like a show trial that is based on an event that could be extremely easy to defend in a court. So like they're not even trying, and that's because the defendants aren't in there to defend themselves. It's just a way of getting money, and it's very similar to what they did to Iran in 2018. Some like kangaroo court in New York said that Iran is responsible for 9/11, and so they took all the money that the U.S. had illegally sanctioned in its unilateral sanctions against Iran that was frozen in a bank here and gave it to some Zionist lawyers who concocted this case. And Iran couldn't defend itself. Obviously, I mean, I don't know. The propaganda and the level of intelligence of a lot of Americans is so questionable that you could probably go up to people on the street and people would say Iran was responsible. But that has nothing to do with reality. I think people who follow the story and are reality-based, at least maybe even just New York Times readers, question whether or not Iran is behind 9/11 because the original narrative had nothing to do with Iran. Iran was completely out of it.
Exactly.
I mean, in fact, we gave Iraq to Iran as a result of our illegal wars. It was like we basically handed over the whole government of Iraq that we invaded and gave democracy to. We handed that over the silver platter to Iran. So if we would have done that,
we're in the names.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, we're in the names in the official narrative. Even I mean, like the people who were blamed for the 9/11, weren't they all Saudi citizens? I'm not saying that they were actually the people to be blamed. I mean, even in that narrative, if we believe that they were Saudi citizens, why should Iran pay for it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Saudi is the arch enemy of Iran, for people who don't know that. Like it's so, and then a lot of people think that the Saudi connection or whatever was just to cover because it was actually another country in the Middle East who's an enemy of Iran, who is responsible for that. So, yeah, there's a super fishy. I mean, I think it was Times or Newsweek magazine had an article like a month after 9/11 with basically all the guys who they say were supposedly responsible, that they had miraculously found their passport somehow undamaged after everyone else in the plane was burnt to unrecognizable DNA crisps or whatever.
Yeah.
The story is so dumb. So they had these scary Muslims, and this, it was like a mainstream news outlet, Newsweek or Time, had an article where they just found all those guys. And they were all living. Like some of them went back. Most of them were on student visas at one point to the U.S. Some were like living back in Morocco, and some were. It was so absurd. Like immediately when there were still mainstream news journalists that hadn't been purged from the system, they had just done a genuine investigative report. Like, let's try and track these guys down. And they tracked them all down. They were like pictures of them. It was the actual person. So basically, that list of names is no longer used anymore because they focus on these guys like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or whatever, that they were able to torture into saying whatever they wanted. So the whole story is so bogus. And yeah, it was Saudi Arabia was their main foil, and then you had after that nonsense, then they started bringing in Saddam Hussein, and then they brought in that whole nonsense, which is totally unrelated to 9/11, and they managed to kill 1 million people because of a non-relationship between their 9/11 story and Saddam Hussein. So now they just have another non-related story, and they're able to accomplish what they want, with Iran supposedly responsible for it all. But the main motivator for that lawsuit wasn't anything to do with holding Iran accountable. It was because there was all this cash in a bank in the U.S. that was held, and they were trying to figure out a way to unlock the door to that cash. And the best way is create some bogus lawsuit where everyone agrees, oh yeah, it's a terrible thing, we got to take that money to give it to the poor victims. And they give like a tiny fraction to the victims, and then the majority of it just goes to the lawyers. And the lawyers didn't really have to work that hard, because all they had to do is say blah 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 blah, and the judge was like, oh, I agree with that. And then there's no justice at all. It's just a total show trial. So it's very pathetic, and that's obviously what this is. And it's really sad, because I don't expect much from the legal system in the U.S., especially when it involves things that have any flavor of Israel. But Lebanon, I thought, wouldn't be that infiltrated, but I guess it is. I mean, it is next door to Israel, so anyway, it's all very depressing, because it means like there really isn't much resistance.
Yeah, but I hope with the interview on Press TV and Veterans Today, we're going to see more people talk about it, because it's really strange that there are not many people who are questioning the so-called official story. So
if anyone knows the VC article, link it in the comments too, because I still haven't read that. So.
Or if we have anyone with expertise in chemistry who's watching this and they want to add any comment, we would be very happy to add it. So,
happy to interview
and even have them to talk about it. Yeah, I'm going to read these lines from the Wikipedia article about the 2003 Bam earthquake, which happened on December 26th and killed more than 40,000 Iranians. So following the earthquake, the U.S. offered direct humanitarian assistance to Iran, and in return, the state promised to comply with an agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which supports greater monitoring of its nuclear interest. In total, a reported 44 countries sent in personnel to assist in relief operations, and 60 countries offered assistance. So, I mean, even at that time when the sanctions were not as severe on Iran, the U.S. offered humanitarian aid only in exchange for more monitoring of Iran's nuclear facilities. And that's how. I mean, I find it really
So is it
hypocritical.
It's definitely gotten worse now, because Israel's just literally bombing aid convoys, right? So, or threatening to.
Yeah,
I think they did anyway. Well, they're bombing. At least they're bombing civilian buildings in Damascus right after the earthquake, so and killing people. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really horrible.
they started by setting conditions for giving people humanitarian aids, and they got to bombing humanitarian aid convoys.
Exactly.
So
But the
it's a
U.S. has
big problem.
officials. There's videos out there that I think I don't know where I saw them last, but I've seen them even before this, where the U.S. is saying, after the war devastated Syria, that their main goal is to restrict reconstruction aid to Syria.
Yes,
So
we
that's
have
the
included
main
that.
goal of the sanctions. So that's pretty evil.
Yeah,
But I think
we have.
this is highly speculative. Like the stuff it said about Beirut, that's just pure science, and it shows you all you need to do is hear their explanation and just read how the scientific explanation for what they're claiming uh, is involved, and you can easily see it's a baloney story, or at least there's way more culpability involved with actors that they're not talking about. Like if actually was an ammonium nitrate explosion, there had to be someone who created that explosion. It wasn't just negligence. Uh, it was actual. There's some person who actually created a bomb in that warehouse. But they have literally shut down their investigation like after a day, and they haven't done anything else with it. So why would you do that? Well, you do that because you don't want to know. You don't want people to know that your investigation doesn't make sense. That's what they did with 9/11. They shipped all the parts of the buildings off to China the next day. Basically, they started shipping stuff away so it couldn't be studied because they don't want an investigation because the story is baloney. But with the earthquake thing, speculatively, I think it's important for people to understand that it is not science fiction and some goofball, tinfoil hat stuff to talk about the intentional creation of earthquakes of that size. That is as very well as 50-year-old technology. It's very well within the capability of the West to do that. And they canceled the underground nuclear testing in Nevada in the U.S. I think it was in the late 50s or early 60s because they were causing, I think it was like 5.8 on the Richter scale earthquakes using 150 kiloton explosions underground. And so that 150 kiloton is not a very big nuclear weapon in today's capabilities. And Israel has a couple hundred, or at least 100 plus of these of nuclear warheads, and the ability to move it into that part of Syria was well within the political boundaries of Israel. So, or not political, but the real boundaries of Israel's power, because of the way they control some of the actors on the ground there. And they had all these guys who are like expertise in digging tunnels who were terrorizing Syria for the last since 2013 or whatever. So, and they recently, I guess, didn't have much to do. So it's really not far fetched to think that they just dug some deep tunnels. They knew where the fault lines were. They knew there was tension on these fault lines because there's always been thinking that there could be an earthquake. It'd be like doing the same thing in California. We know there's going to be a big earthquake there at some point because there's tension on the fault lines, and they just dug a really deep hole near that fault line, and this released the tension with a nuclear detonation underground. I mean, there's photographic evidence of these tunnel diggers. I think it was in Aleppo that they were burying ammonium nitrate fuel oil explosive in the ground. So we know that they had plans or whatever to do similar underground explosions to cause devastation in some parts of Syria. So to ramp that up, I mean, theoretically, you could do it with ammonium nitrate if you had like trucks and trucks and trucks and trucks of this, but it seems way more likely that it could be done with a nuclear warhead. But anyway, all that to be said, total speculation, but that should be on the table that this could be man-made because it came at a time where there was a lot of normalization between Turkey and Syria, and it doesn't look like since the earthquake there was a great coming together, which would have been the main threat of a disaster like that. You would have like coming together and like a greater move towards peace because of people working together to mutually overcome the losses. So it looks like the political lines were sharply divided, and they were just entrenched by this incident. So, yeah, I don't see any reason to just completely ignore that possibility. And I think the fact that it is even on the table, it shows that the level of despair and evil that exists in with actors in that region. So
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, this could have been totally just happening naturally, and there's nothing behind what we're seeing. And but the thing is, from like, if the US can say that killing 500,000 children in Iraq was worth what they did, I don't see anything stopping the US or the Zionist regime from wanting to kill more people in the region. I mean, this is something that, like you said, is not far-fetched to imagine or to think as a possibility. But despite all of that, I mean, just recently, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that heads of different Arab countries are meeting with the Syrian government, and there are, I mean, the efforts to for the like countries and governments of the region to come together and put the like the disputes and differences aside after 12 years is going on, and that's good. I mean, I hope it keeps going on and moving forward.
yeah, yeah, I hope so. I mean, the, the real winner in the earthquake was Israel. So um, I hope some of the countries can do
How?
something. Well, because
How do you think?
they're the adversaries, the states that they have created as adversaries in the region are the ones that suffered. So like by I mean
Well,
they're able to exert further force over Syria, even denying them humanitarian aid. I think the U.S. was a big loser because they were like publicly shamed by China. I mean, not big loser in terms of life, obviously, but in terms of political clout. China had to shame the U.S. into like allowing aid convoys in there. So China was able to look like a real humanitarian uh, leader by
yeah.
scolding the U.S. And I think that's really helpful in the global South to help people orient to the
Well,
reality of the U.S. as a hegemon, and a hegemon that's very amoral. And so that was a loss to the U.S.'s credibility as a genuine actor.
if there was anything left to be.
Well,
That's,
you would think there's a lot of people that still need reminders that we're
yeah.
we have a
Well, maybe. Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe.
yeah.
Okay, so is this the end of our
I guess so. In that depressing light, unless
this
there's anything
episode?
more we can leave in an uplifting light. Is there any good news for today?
Maybe I think the news that Arab countries are meeting, the leaders of Arab countries are coming together after 12 years. That's good news, right?
Yeah, that's true. The
Uh,
Syria, like people are coming to shake the hands of Assad. But that's great to see. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know how he does it because I think a lot of those people deserve to be spat at by him. But
because
he's
he
a really
prioritizes the
yeah,
benefits, the interest of his and other nations.
he's an amazing leader. Yeah, I mean to be
Yeah,
able to do that, shake hands with people who tried to kill you is amazing.
yeah.
So yeah, he's that's an interesting event happening now. Another thing, maybe if people have actually listened to the end of this thing, I congratulate you. Satara and I are thinking maybe we should do like daily or maybe like 5 times a week or something like that. A very regular, short-ish daily recap of the news. If anyone thinks that's a good idea and you want to comment about that, give us some encouragement. We were thinking of doing that. So yeah, let us know if you think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can just add this one that the heads of the Iraqi, Jordanian, Palestinian, Libyan, Egyptian, and Emirati Houses of Representatives, as well as representatives from Oman and Lebanon, traveled to Syria as a part of a delegation from the Arab Interparliamentary Union. That was published 4 days ago, if I'm not mistaken. Which is great news. I mean,
Good news,
everyone
yeah.
was waiting for Assad to go, but now it
Yeah,
looks like they're
we have Russia to thank
reuniting.
for that. So Russia and Iran. Iran
Yeah,
also very much important for that. So it shows you that it is possible to
and
push
the
back.
people of Syria.
Well, yeah,
Mhm.
but I think without Iran and Russia, they would have wouldn't have stood a chance. It was really because there was a coalition of people pushing back against this Zionist Western hegemon, and it shows that they can't get everything they want. So that's a positive. Well, we had to re-record this because of some internet connections, but thank you for listening to another episode of Twice Told Tales podcast. We hope to see you again soon. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.